session 118, and I wanted to finish with the 9th commandment yesterday, but there is still so much to discuss. Thou shalt not bear false witness. And I really want you to look into the world today. Look around you into the international media and government and authority, policing system, science, religion, education. And we see the false witnesses all over the place. I can't even touch. I hope most of you have done the Bible study, 2 trees and 2 kingdoms and a vaccine. If you haven't, please WhatsApp me on 082-8933-826 so I can send you the link. There's so much false witnessing going around, especially in the last days. How on earth will Satan and all his false ministers that looks like angels of light, how are they going to deceive the whole world? It is actually happening right under our noses because of false witnesses for so many years, since the Garden of Eden. And because people are getting lulled into sleep and they just accept whatever somebody in authority tells them. And we've looked together at how the false witnesses was brought by the authorities against people like Stephen and Yeshua and Paul and all the prophets of the Old Testament. It was always the people in authority. And then we looked at the Torah commandment that said, you shall not go with the masses. You will not bear false witness against a person. You shall not manufacture false witnesses. And at the end of the day, when we look around our situation where we are now, currently, 2021, the current situation that if you dare mention it, you get banned from all these social media platforms. Are we really hearing genuine witnesses, or is it false? Is the mass media and the global indoctrination system that we hear on radio and see on TV and read about in the newspapers, are they giving us honest and true witness of what is really happening with the health and economy and global planning? This is so difficult. I don't want to talk too much about it. Most of you must know by now that we are actually struggling through a system where the New World Order is trying to take control. And they are using very clever, very deceitful means to allude that they are doing us a favor and that they are looking after us. In the meantime, it's false witnesses just to lure us into buying their deceptions. And it's always, as was with the prophets and as was with the time of Yeshua, it was always the people in authority. Do yourself a favor and read the whole chapter of 1 Kings, chapter 22. This is where the king of Judah and the king of Israel actually wanted to put their forces together to make a stronger army and go and fight against their enemies. And the one king said to the other, but before we go and fight, maybe we must just get a word from God. And then Ahab, King Ahab, you know, Jezebel's husband, King Ahab, the Baal worshipper that was false witnessing to Israel and Judah and conniving them and pushing them into worshipping Baal, breaking the Torah of God. And King Ahab called all his prophets, 400 of them. And they all said, no, go and fight. You will indeed have victory. But then the king of Israel said to the king of Judah, to King Ahab, I don't know if I can believe all these prophets of yours. They all speak too nicely. You know that proverb that says, the verse that says, people in the last days will not hear sound doctrine. And they will gather these 400 false prophets of King Ahab around them, so that their ears can be tickled and they can stay in their comfort zone and they can believe God will look after them and give them victory. Although in the meantime, they are breaking God's law. They are not reading the signs of the time. They are not listening to the warnings that God has given about the mark of the Antichrist, slowly but surely creeping in even under the elected ones. The mark of the Antichrist, in direct opposition to the mark of God, which is obedience to his law. And King Ahab said, there is one more prophet, but I hate him. That's 1 Kings 22 verse 8. And the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, there is yet one more man, Micaiah, the son of Imlam, by whom we may inquire directly from Yahuwah. But I hate him. Why do I hate him? Because he never prophesied good concerning me. On these channels that you are following, I am not prophesying good about the kings and princes of this world. I'm not prophesying good. And listen, I'm not a prophet. Prophesying means that you're witnessing. I'm not witnessing anything good about the religious system that is bringing false witnesses and deceiving people into lawlessness. People hate the prophets, the real, honest, obedient witnesses of God, just like King Ahab hated Micaiah. But the king of Israel said, no, you have to call him, because I have to hear from God whether we must go up and fight or not. And Micaiah was called, and he said sarcastically to the king, just go and fight, you're going to win. And then the king said, how many times must I tell you not to lie to me? Don't adjure me. It's the word, don't make fun of me. Because the prophet was making fun of King Ahab, telling him exactly what he wants to hear. Well, they both know, King Ahab knows that God has nothing good in store for King Ahab. And eventually, Micaiah told King Ahab, you're going to be killed. And Israel is going to be scattered. And all of you are going to die in the battle. And because of your disobedience and your idolatry and your whoredoms and your falsehood, you will actually taste death in battle tomorrow. And then King Ahab said, can you hear how this prophet is always preaching bad things about me? He never wants to talk good about me. And during that time, Yahuwah was in heaven, of course, and he was through his word and through his spirit that is always with us here on earth. He was listening to this conversation. He was hearing every word, and he was seeing the intention of the hearts. And Yahuwah said in verse 20, who shall persuade Ahab that he may go up and fall in the battle? God was, just like we discussed with Pharaoh, God hardened his heart. What was already in his heart, God made that more, so that his plans and his ultimate goal and his purification with his people Israel can come to play. And the king that is worshipping Baal can be slaughtered in the battle, just as he wants to be. He wants to go to battle. He actually wants to do it anyway. He wants to be disobedient and rejecting God's Torah. He wants to hate God's prophets. So God is just giving him the strong delusion that he is already believing. Nobody can point a finger to God and say these verses show that he's deceiving people. He wasn't deceiving Adam and Eve. He told them, you're going to be deceived. Don't go near that tree. And when they went near the tree, they got deceived. Just like God prophesied. Is it God's fault? Is it God's fault that King Ahab lured and deceived the whole of house of Judah and house of Israel to worship Baal? The sun god? The Sunday god? The Christmas god? The God that came from Egypt and Babylon, that is worshipped on sun holy days, in direct contradiction to the law and the Sabbath and the feast days of the God who created everything. It's not his fault. But he brings you, if you want to believe this, he's going to bring you prophets, and he's going to bring you soothsayers that will come and tickle your ears. And if you wish to listen to the soothsayers and the false prophets and the lying spirits in the mouths of the false prophets and the lying pen of the scribes, then God is going to allow that strong delusion to deceive you. And that is why the whole world is going to walk and wander after the beast. And they're going to worship the Antichrist. And they're not going to recognize the real Messiah. Because like the Bible says, I never knew you. Go away from me, you who do iniquity. I never knew you. You never looked for me in the Word. You never studied my Torah. You never looked for my standard. You never read my instructions. You never circumcised your heart to follow me with all your might, your strength, your heart, your soul, your spirit, your body, your love. And because of that, God will allow the strong delusion. So he sits in heaven and he says, who shall go and persuade Ahab? And there came forth a spirit and stood before Yahuwah and said, I will persuade him. And Yahuwah said, how will you do it? And the spirit said, I will go forth and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his false prophets. Verse 23, now therefore behold, Yahuwah has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these your prophets, and Yahuwah has spoken evil concerning you. God doesn't lie. Through Micaiah, this prophet, he's telling Ahab, listen, God is allowing a false lying spirit. You see that those 400 prophets standing over there telling you that you're the greatest king and you're going to have victory tomorrow and everything you do is fine. And God is with you. You see them, you hear them. God, Yahuwah, has sent us a lying spirit into their mouths. There's only evil for you. This is what the true prophet of God says to King Ahab. And then Zedekiah, the son of Chenanah, went near and struck Micaiah on the cheek. He gave him a punch in the face. In these days, to speak truth, hard, cold, honest truth against religion, government, education, society, traditions, you'll get punched in the face. You will experience it if you haven't. And if you have, you know exactly what I mean. You'll get punched in the face by friends, family, and there'll come a time, as the Bible prophesies, that we will be punched in the face just like Messiah Yeshua, just like Paul, just like Micaiah the prophet, just like Stephen. And we will be killed for the witness of Yeshua, the Torah that became flesh and that is teaching us the way back to God, Yahuwah our Father. And the Bible says, for the witness of Yeshua, we will be martyred. It is called witnesses in the Greek. Witness in Greek is martyr. You might lose your life, if not physically. You die to yourself, like we've discussed. You will be persecuted. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you. But do not lose faith, my honest and faithful servants who do not bear false witness of me. Do not lose faith, because I have overcome this world. And I will come back and I will redeem you out of the grave. And I will redeem you out of the hand of Pharaoh, the Antichrist, that is putting you in slavery. I will redeem you. And I will take my revenge on all my enemies. And I will cut out the lying tongue of the false prophets. I'm going to read for you Jeremiah 8 verse 8. Even the stork in the sky knows her appointed seasons. But you, my people, do not know the requirements of your God. Even the stork, the turtle dove, all the animals, all of nature knows exactly the seasons. Yet we know Christmas and Ishtar and Halloween and New Year's and Sunday. That's what we have been growing up with. We don't know the seasons of God. God says, You don't know, although all of nature works in my season, you don't know the requirements of your God. How can you say we are wise? How can you say the law of Yahuwah is with us when, in fact, the lying pen of the scribes has produced deception? The wise will be put to shame. They will be dismayed and trapped, since they have rejected the Torah. What wisdom do they really have? Jeremiah 8 verse 8. Go and read this verse and understand how in the last days, throughout all the ages, but culminating in an absolute crescendo in the last days, the lying pen of the scribes is teaching us falsehoods and false witnesses and luring us away from the tree of life, luring us to come and listen to the false witnesses and the lying spirits in the mouth of the false prophets and the lying pen of the scribes, listening to the strong delusion under the tree of knowledge of good and evil that's telling us you will not die. You can do what the rest of the world does. You can do what I'm telling you to do. It's fine. God will not punish you. You will not die. You are still a Christian. I'm going to read for you New Testament, 2 Thessalonians. Where am I now? 2 Thessalonians. I'm sorry. 2 Thessalonians 2 from verse 7. For the mystery of iniquity does already work. And then shall the wicked be revealed, whom Yahuwah will consume with the spirit of his mouth. Even those whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all kinds of power and sign and lying wonders, false witnesses, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness. Deceivableness of unrighteousness. Righteousness is following God's right way. Unrighteousness is departing from God's way and walking on the broad way and not the narrow road. And those who come after the working of Satan deceives you into walking on the broad road, the broad way, the way of unrighteousness that leads to death. And with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish. Because why? Because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And because they don't receive the love of the truth, and because they're coming in the working of Satan, and because they're deceiving us into unrighteousness, and because it is the mystery of iniquity, the mystery of lawlessness, verse 11, God causes the strong delusion to be sent over them. Why? Verse 12, because they had no pleasure in God's Torah, but they had pleasure in unrighteousness. I still have so much I want to tell you. I want to read for you 1 John 4, Matthew 7, 2 Peter 2, Matthew 24, Romans 16. I still have a lot to discuss with you. And maybe we are standing still at something that you feel you've heard enough now. Because I'm preaching to the choir. You guys have come out of deception into righteousness. That is not popular. You guys have done that. But I'm giving you these verses. I'm trying to give you tools, verse after verse, and explaining how they work together. Because you have to be willing, like the prophet Micaiah, to stand before the kings. Like Yeshua says, one day you'll stand before synagogues. And don't worry about what you're going to say. The Spirit of truth will speak through you. But you need to equip yourself with the knowledge of the word, so that you can stand up against 400 false prophets that has a lying spirit inside of them. And the kings of this world only want to hear what is tickling their ears. But I want to equip you with these verses. And you work through them so that the Spirit can cement them in your memory. And you have this available, not to judge, but to warn. The prophets, Messiah, Paul, Peter, John, they never tried to judge people and condemn them. We know according to Torah we are not allowed. We are not the judges, but we come to warn the sleeping sheep, the blind people, and those who do not have ears to hear, that are still under deception. Because the time will come, says Father Yahuwah, that I will send my Son to bring sight to the blind and hearing to the deaf and life to the dead and freedom to those who are in slavery and in prison. Rise up, Talita. He says to the young girl that has died, that's 12 years old. Be healed, he says to the woman that had the unkosher, unclean menstruation for 12 years. It is time to speak to Israel, the 12 tribes, the house of Judah and the scattered house of Israel, every tribe, nation and tongue. Speak the truth. Do not bear false witness any longer.